dexterous comb-over. Tom tipped the ash into his own cupped hand, tamped it into dust, and blew this into the heavy, humid air. From below, there came the noise of metal scraping on tile. A young woman had emerged from the sliding doors that Tom assumed must separate the balcony from the old man's own service department. A very young woman, a girl, in fact. She wore only a sarong, which was wrapped around her slim, sinuous hips, and from where Tom stood, he could appreciate the orchidaceous perfection of her breasts, the taut purity of her matte black skin. She must, he thought, be a desert tribeswoman, but what the hell was she doing with this dried-up stick of a guy? What she was doing was drawing up a small metal table and placing upon it a tall glass frosted with condensation and choked with fruit. She removed the newspaper, tidied its pages, and folded it. What she was doing was unaffectedly ministering to the old man's needs, to the point that she seemed quite unconscious of the way one of her long, pinky-brown nipples pressed against his neck as she smoothed the sweat-damp hair on his forehead. "Thanks, honey," the old man rasped, and the complacent tone of his voice summoned up Tom's righteous indignation, reserves of which were generous to begin with and always easily replenished by the follies of his countrymen. Jesus Christ, Tom internally expostulated. That sick creep is one of those disgusting sex tourists. He's come over here to get his gross old body fondled by one of these young girls. It's revolting. He can't be allowed to get away with it. Tom's grasp on the ethnic complexities of the country wasn't strong, but he did know that the Tuganarong, the copper-skinned natives of the offshore Feltham Islands, came here as guest workers, and that many of the young women ended up prostituting themselves. But this girl was clearly a desert tribeswoman, and he hadn't seen any like her hanging around outside the bars and strip clubs of Vance's small but savage red light district. In truth, the whole bizarre palimpsest of race and culture in this vast land bamboozled Tom. In theory, the Anglo descendants of the former colonial power still constituted the elite, yet only the previous morning, in the Highland township where they'd stopped to get gas and cash, Tom had found himself in line at an ATM behind a shambolic shaking figure that was bent almost double and wearing a dirty blue patterned native toga. But when his turn came at the brushed steel keyboard, it transpired that the man hadn't been waiting to make a withdrawal at all. Rather, he stooped to retrieve a half-smoked cigarette butt from the dusty ground. Tom found himself fixated on the white trough of a scar that bisected the old wino's grizzled head from nape to crown. Was this, Tom wondered, the most extreme of tribal markings? Or had the man stumbled drunk into a buzzsaw? Then, as the figure straightened up and the turtle head swung up and round, Tom was confronted by the sun-cracked features of an ancient Anglo, whose mouth was crusted with dried yellow goo. Later on, as Tom struggled to pilot the preposterously large minivan, which he had hired in an excess of foolish grandiosity, through the maddening melee of the main street, he spotted the same old Anglo wino in the shade of a fat-trunked tree, set back from the road. Now, recalling the unpleasant scene that had followed, Tom took a particularly deep draw on his cigarette, and it fizzed and popped in the humid atmosphere. He deposited another quarter-inch of ash into his hand, tamped, and blew. Tommy Jr., who as usual had been right at the back of the car, had also seen the old wino. More importantly, he'd seen what the indigenes with whom the wino was sitting and drinking palm spirit were selling. "Dad! Dad!" he boomed out. Why couldn't he control his volume? "They've got one of those model things we saw back a ways. Can we stop and get this one? Can we please?" Tom was going to give this request no more attention than the previous score, but Tommy's mother had decided to intercede. "Why don't we stop?"